presentation because it fits in very nicely where I want to take us in my section. Now, for a starter, I'd certainly look around with technology, and that's always a bad thing. Go. Look, technology finally catches up with us. Now, what I would like to take you through is the concept of the management of risk, the fact that risk needs to be used in all management decisions. Hence my title, is it the management of risk or risky management? Because quite obviously, if we don't understand the risks that we're managing, then it really is risky management. Now, our journey with risk management started back in 1990, or actually back in 1990, when we started to write the Australian-New Zealand Standard 4360. Now, all of these slides, by the way, are available on your message stick that you'll get from the conference, so there's no need to sit down getting writer's cramp trying to work out what we're doing here. The first thing that we did when we started to look at writing 4360 was, were we writing a standard about the risk management process that relates to insurable risk and to loss? Or were we writing a standard that was how to apply a risk management process to the management of risk? And the end result was that the committee decided that we were really about producing a document that would assist managers to effectively manage their businesses and to effectively address risk in all of the decisions that they were making. So it was very much a case of, we saw that every time you made a decision, you created the risk of, have you made the right decision and can you manage it to a successful outcome? Risk was defined as the chance of something happening which will have an impact on an objective. So again, it's back to management. Every organisation's management has to work out what are the objectives that we want to achieve, and therefore, what are the risks that I have to manage if I'm to achieve those objectives? We then ended up going out and doing a rewrite in 1999. The reason that we did this was twofold. One, that we found that the work that we'd done had started to get wide acceptance within Australia, but as a result of the international mining companies that worked in Australia, we were finding more and more people were starting to talk to us about 4360 from around the world. It was in fact starting to be used quite extensively in both the developing world with the mining industry, but also we found it being used quite extensively in Canada and in the UK. We'd also started to write some handbooks that apply our risk management process to how we had developed a number of handbooks that were subject matter specific. And as a result of that, we saw a need to update a few things. So we cleaned the original document up and focused more on what was the management criteria, what did top management have to do in order to benefit from the use of 4360. And so that took us to the 2004 edition. Now, the main thing with the 2004 edition was that we changed the definition, because by this time there was an ISO IEC document, Guide 73, that came up with the definition of risk. And so now we were looking at a definition that had removed the certainty of will to the chance of uncertainty. So it was starting to very much focus on what are the uncertain things that we have to manage, which is, when you think about it, quite right, because if we're certain of something happening, then it's not a risk. It's the uncertainty that we have to deal with, because that's where the risk is, because we don't have real control over that unless we've gone and worked out exactly what we're dealing with. So the 2004 edition came out, and we found it being used extensively in parts of Europe. The French nuclear industry started to use it for some of their new was using it extensively in their national health, their passport office, even within their spy unit, GCHQ, the General Headquarters for Communications. It was even finding its way into parts of Canada and the US. But there, particularly in the US, they didn't like the word standard because, of course, they were thinking in terms of a standard being a certification standard, and that caused problems. But the management of risk is not something that you can be certified against. The management of risk is very much about understanding the uncertainty and using that to help you make the decisions. Now, having got this stage where the management of risk was starting to be accepted by a whole range of people, I got involved in Australia, the Standards Australia, when they started to look at the challenge of a single business management system standard. Because what we had up to 2004 was, you're familiar with ISO 9000, ISO 14000, the environmental standard. There's a whole raft of standards coming out that were management system standards. They were all certifiable. They all used similar terms, but they provided you with different definitions. They used a similar format, but not an identical format. So if you were a large multinational that was looking at putting in a range of management system standards, you suddenly found yourself with a library of documents that then gave you conflicting definitions of terms and gave you conflicting formats and processes. So what we looked at in Australia was the challenge we saw was, could we come up with a single thing which we thought we call a business management system standard. Now I realise that would need to be changed to something else, because the minute we said it was a business management standard, then all the public sector would say, oh, it's got nothing to do with me. It's a bit like business continuity management. Governments will say, oh, well, that's got nothing to do with me. Well, of course, it really has, but we need to then look at what sort of common language are we able to deal with. So when we sat down and started to look at this, Standards Australia set up a group, and we were lucky that we had a number of people on that group that came from industries that were faced with managing a number of management system standards, and we're having this great debate of why can't we have the same definitions for the one word, why can't we have the same process? And they were having real difficulty putting this together. So we looked at putting a business management system standard together. The challenge is, though, is which one do we got? Because everybody says, oh, that's a great idea, as long as you make it the same as 9,000, or as long as you make it the same as 14,000. We're all really keen on harmonisation as long as it's with my standard. And surprisingly, this causes one or two frictions. Now, so we went along reasonably amicable, but then the real problem that we came to was, if we went and developed a business management system standard in Australia, what was going to happen with the Australian mirror committees to the 9,000s, to the 14,000s, to the 27,000s, to this whole myriad range of ISO management system standards? What we acknowledged was that we really needed for ISO to be the one that decided to put together a single business management system standard. And we were fortunate that one of our group was Dr. Kevin Foley, who had a very distinguished history in management teaching and management work and standards work. And he put together, in the end, this meta-management document which pulled together a whole range of material, focusing mainly on quality, but really looking at the totality of management and how you go about applying it. And so we floated that out as Handbook 265 back in 2004. And the main intent of this document was to get our friends in ISO around the world to at least read it and then to start arguing and perhaps tell us that we didn't know where we were going, but at least to get people to start talking about the desirability, in fact the need, for a single management system standard. Now, whilst that was going on, we did finally start to get a bit of a stirring out of ISO, and that was when in 2007 they set up the Joint Technical Coordination Group. Now, one of the problems with the JTCG is that, of course, it consists of the chairs and secretaries of the various ISO technical committees that produce management system standards. So you have actually got the two people who have a vested interest in keeping things the way they are. And everybody said this is a wonderful idea that we look at developing harmonisation between our standards. Again, as long as you harmonise with my standard. Needless to say, it met several times before, shall we say, things started to come together for us. Now, the objective was not an earth-shattering one. It wasn't as though the objective was to create a business management system standard. It was merely to move from being compatible to being in alignment. We weren't asking a humongous step. We just really wanted to get some alignment so that the people that had to use our documents didn't have to sit down and try and line things up. And so the process went along, very worthy objective. The problems that we had were, again, terms and definitions. And what happens in ISO is that each technical committee or coordination group sets up a separate task force to deal with terms and definitions. And the people that then disappear off into that group are those, like myself, that are a bit odd and like to make sure that we have clear terminology in documents. And so we get along quite well producing what I would suggest was a good range of definitions for the various management terms. The problem was when it goes back to the full committee for endorsement and adoption, a few things drop off the back of the truck. And the one that sticks in my craw the most is, of course, the definition of risk, which in 31000 is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. We find in the NXSL document that the JCGG produced that they define risk as the effect of uncertainty. The effect of uncertainty on what? But it's the effect of uncertainty. And the only reason this happened was that one of the other groups had a difficulty if we used the word objective. Now this is a group that is looking at producing management system standards, but have a problem with a management system standard having an objective. You've got to wonder what sort of management we're dealing with, don't you? But anyway, we still end up with that definition. What fascinates me is that just before that, in the document, they define objective. So we do define objective in the document, but not use it in respect to risk. You can understand that there is a certain way to go before we succeed in this area. Now, whilst we've been beavering away in the JTCG, Kevin Foley's document has in fact caused ISO to come together with a group and produce this wonderful document called the IUMSS, or the Integrated Use of Management System Standards. So we've managed to produce a book that is about this thick, that explains how to use this plethora of management system standards in a sort of coordinated way. It's not, I would suggest, a really good look, but nevertheless, it's a starting point. And the IUMSS handbook is certainly a wonderful assistance to any organisation that has a range of ISO management system standards that they have to deal with. Now, whilst all of this is going on, ISO have decided to bite the bullet in respect to risk management and have set up a working group to write a risk management standard, which ended up being ISO 31000, and in the process we also updated Guide 73, the vocabulary, back in November of 2009. And this is where risk is defined as the effect of uncertainty on objectives. It's where we also introduced the concept that you needed to understand what were the principles that needed to be adopted if risk was to be effectively managed. And the first of those was it must add value to the organisation. And yet how many organisations do you find that the risk people are all about saying, oh no, you can't do that, it's too much of a risk. Oh no, that's far too risky, you can't do that. Rather than saying, have we got the knowledge, skills and resources available to effectively manage this risk and therefore achieve the objective that we're wanting to do? And so that's the real difficulty, because it brings us back to where we need to talk to the board and we need to talk to top management. And again, 31000 introduces that by saying how you need to weave risk management into the management system. But of course, we're not allowed to use the word management system in our standard, because you've got to be a management system standard for that. So we're left with having to talk about the management framework. But when you come across that section of 31000, it's really talking about the management system that you apply to your organisation. So 31000 has really picked up and done a much better job than we did in Australia with 4360. It has gone and brought risk very firmly into the management of the organisation, the accountability and responsibility of top management and the board to not only understand what the risks are that they have to manage, but to also make sure that people are accountable, because we introduced the wonderful concept of the risk owner. And that is the person with the authority to make decisions with respect to risk. So we've now really got a good document that says if you exercise a delegation, if you make a decision on behalf of the organisation, you're actually creating a risk, and how do you go about making sure that you manage that risk in order to achieve the objectives that have been set. Now we'll go back to ISO and the wonderful subject of management system standards. They invited the risk management people to actually get involved with the G31000. Actually, they invited me and my secretary to the technical group to come along and be patronised in the initial stages. But then the technology group really took an interest in 31000 and what it was about. And so we started to get a little bit of risk in. One of the problems was that, as I said, they didn't want to take notice of what the terminology people said. They wanted to do what they felt. So they started to talk about risk and opportunity rather than threats and opportunity, or just talking about risks. This is despite the fact that in their own definition of risk, they've acknowledged that risk is both opportunity and threat. It's negative and positive. So we have this problem. They're saying it's all about risks and opportunities rather than threats and opportunities. And again, there's the definition which causes me a certain degree of heartburn. So they put together this document, and it was, at that stage it was called ISO Guide 83. It was an interesting document that set out a common framework for management system documents. It provided the terminology, albeit an inadequate terminology, but it was a starting point. So the reason it was called a guide was it gave a process to be able to put it out to vote, which is one of the great strengths of the ISO system. Now, I think it would be fair to say that the general expectation was that it was going to fail to be accepted. And everybody was very surprised when the ISO community came back and said, what a great idea, bringing some harmonisation to management systems. And so we ended up with that XSL. Now, the interesting thing has been that the people the technical committees that have come along in recent years have found XSL a wonderful document, and they've used it as the blueprint for putting together their standards. The only ones that complain loudly about it are what I would class as our hereditary group, the quality and the environmentalists, who again, the environmentalists were the ones that had the difficulty of having an objective, and the quality people couldn't cope with the concept of risk. They had to come up with risk-based thinking, which leaves us all somewhat confused. One of the things for my sins was to do a survey, go through all the management system standards and pull out, see how they dealt with risk. It was interesting that the majority of standards have used the ISO 31000 definition of risk, not the XSL risk. And the majority of them talk about risks or talk about threats and opportunities. They haven't liked the concept of risk and opportunities either. So, in effect, there has been this adoption. Now, our friends at ISO that gave us the IMOS are now in the process of doing a review of that. And it's a wonderful document, providing you do actually use the ISO 31000 definition of risk and you get rid of risk and opportunity. As I said, call it threats and opportunity or call it risk, but don't call it risks and opportunities. But wouldn't it be nice if we could actually get together and produce a single management system standard that sets out that higher level document? And then it can leave the specialist groups like quality, environment, or whatever, to write documents that are subject specific for those of you that actually have to take that subject on hand. And really the opportunity is now, because we've just had the latest edition of 9000 published and the latest edition of 14000. So we've got a 4 or 5 year window of opportunity, I would suggest, when we might actually be able to produce a good management system standard, providing ISO is willing to bite the bullet. So we've ended up with this bit of a problem, but I think we have got to a point where we can do something to move to the next step. Because at least NXSL does introduce this fact that risks are there and are part and parcel of every business activity and business management system, and therefore risk needs to be managed. And if we go and really follow Kevin, some of the work that Kevin Foley did, because Kevin gave us an entire chapter on risk, plus he addressed risk all the way through his document. I think there is certainly great scope for the IMOS to be able to take care of that, but I still think that at XSL it's got enough escape holes that people are able to sort of decide to do things the way they want to, put a variation here and there without being brought to task. So that's the situation that we've got to. Where we go into the future, I don't know. But certainly I would like to see us end up with a single management system standard that takes 31000, weaves it across the system, into the system. Not to make it a certifiable thing. The last thing I want is risk management to be certifiable. For the simple reason, it's about decision making. And how do you certify decision making? You might be able to certify the decision maker perhaps, but there is the real problem of how do we do that. So the challenge is there. The challenge is really up to the technical management board of ISO to take it. How they go is anybody's guess, because it's an strange and wondrous world where the politics of ISO, but I would suggest that there is a very real market there for a single management system standard. Now, I've given you a range of light reading if you're masochistic enough to be able to want to follow the various documents that I've pulled this from. But the thing to always remember is that risk management's a journey, it's not a destination. Because as long as we are running a business, we have risks to manage. Even if our task is to wind the business up, we still have risks to manage until the day after our organisation has ceased to exist. But look, you don't have to manage risks, that's the great thing. Survival is not compulsory. Anyone can go bankrupt. But always remember the greatest risk of all is to take no risk at all. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.